Good morning, welcome to Sports Radio 1310 The Ticket. George DeJohn, Train Station Fitness Show. Good friend of mine, been in the studio many times, Dr. Jeremy Webster. We're talking today about genetic testing. And we've done this once before, but even if you don't intend to do it, it's important for you to know why. One of the things I promoted on Facebook, and if you don't have a chance to hear the promos, you live outside of Texas, and you want to know what the show is coming up the next week, you can go to Facebook, enter George DeJohn, and I will accept you as a friend. And you can see some of the things that I write about just life in general or about the show. But one of the things I talked about on there, or questions I posed, was, can we have a predisposition genetically to craving bad foods like sugars? Well, we know that ice cream was not available 2,000 years ago, but what were the sugars that our genes would be turned on to? What would be something that we would crave at that time? Why do we hate vegetables? And not everybody hates vegetables. I absolutely love them. And I'll share that with you in a little bit, something I've not shared with you, Dr. Webster. So there's a lot of questions about why we are the way we are when it comes to our health and fitness. Why are some people really fit when they do high endurance training and others are still fat? Why are some people really fit when they do strength training and no endurance training or aerobic training, and the others are fat? And these are questions that I've not written down, so we have to remember them because they're important to address.
There's some of the basic things that this test covers. I don't know if the audience knows this, but we're going over your test results today.
Yeah, I didn't mention that. We're actually going to go over my results, and they've taken about 4 weeks, 5 weeks to come in.
It takes 3 weeks, but we've been on vacation.
Yeah, we've been on vacation. But I mean,
vacation.
it takes 3 weeks from the time you send the test in to get the results back. And we're going to go over my test today and also a female's test to show you both sides of what the results are. But there's something really important today that you need to know when you take any, I'm going to blanket this, Dr. Webster, and say any test, that the results do not always correlate with the recommendations.
Oh, great point. Good
right?
point. Yes.
So, and because I looked at the test and I was disappointed.
And maybe confused.
And confused.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about that coming up here in a little while, because when a doctor, a nutritionist, anybody who reads the results of a test says, okay, you're screwed up, this is what you need to do, it's not always what you need to do. And that can actually, what their recommendations are, whether it be from the lab or the doctor or the nutritionist, may not be in the best interest of your health and or fat loss results, or goal rather.
Intriguing
right?
point, yeah, and I can't wait to get into this a little bit deeper.
So we'll do that. Let's talk coming up next about the powers of our genetics, why they're talking to us, and why people are so different in their needs. What are they attracted to, and what is it that they don't like? Let's talk about that. Then we'll get into my test and this other person's test and talk more about the recommendations that are not necessarily in the best interest of the results that were given, okay?
Yeah.
Dr. Webster and I coming up next, 7:05, Sports Radio 1310, The Ticket. 7:13, Sports Radio 1310, The Ticket. George DeJohn, Train Station Fitness Show with my friend Dr. Webster today. We're talking about genetic testing and why you need to get a genetic test. And we say, well, George, you don't need to get one. I don't need one. I'm 40 years old. I'm 50. I'm 60. I've been fine all these years. I just want to make a little bit of a tweak in my program, let's say, or in my body. Well, if you've ever wondered why you have a craving for a certain type of food, whether that be a sugared food or salt, and you've done everything in the world to curb that craving, but you've not been able to do it, you're happy with your body, but you're not 100% happy with your body. You've got 100 pounds to lose, and you've lost 50 pounds before, but you can't get past the other 50 because you have all these other cravings. Is it mental? Is it emotional? Is it a genetic predisposition for you to crave certain foods that are unhealthy for you, that affect not only your health, but your aesthetic appearance as well? So why, let's first go with that question, why do people need to have a genetic test? Or do they even need it?
Well, it depends what type of genetic test you're really looking for. It depends on what the information you're looking for.
Specifically for what we're discussing today.
Specifically this one, George, it's all about fitness, health, and weight loss. In my practice, I look at weight loss and fitness as one of my primary things that I do in practice. And the simple, small list that I have of things that can really affect that, the general categories are hormones, neurotransmitters, gut function imbalance, toxicity, sleep, insulin resistance, adrenal fatigue, anemia, nutritional deficiencies, and get this, poor diet and exercise. You think that has a little bit to do with it?
Yeah, of course.
Now, up to this point, I've been able to test every one of those factors except for what is the ideal diet and what is the ideal exercise routine for you, specifically for you. I can test all these other things and say, you need exactly this to fix this problem with your metabolism. But you know what we've been doing for diet? We've been giving everybody the same, the Paleolithic diet.
Right.
Generally, but what is the Paleolithic diet?
It's basically the diet that we knew, if we're going back to the caveman era. We've known that for thousands of years, of what we're able to pick off of a tree, off the ground, what we're able to hunt, right?
Exactly.
The hunter-gatherer diet.
But what if, George, what if your ancestors are from southern Italy and my ancestors are from northern, what's the most northern part, Denmark or somewhere in the northern part of Europe? Would you say the foods that are available in southern Italy, which is very rich and lush and has a lot of fruits and vegetables growing, versus the northern European ancestry has really not a lot of those things? They might have some roots available, but they're not going to have as many fruits and vegetables. They're going to have to rely a lot more on heavy fat animal products to get their calories and to get their nutrition. So depending on where your ancestors are from kind of depends on what within that Paleolithic realm, which foods they had available to them.
Now, I hear that, and I don't mean to go too far off course here, but wouldn't some be able to argue and say, well, we also didn't live that long back then, so for those who are living on the higher fat foods like boars and, you know, because that's what we had if you were inland and you didn't have fish available, you would have pigs, of course, for your fat, for some of your fat anyway, and eggs. But wouldn't some make that argument and say, well, yeah, well, Dr. Webster and George, I could hear what you're saying about our genes being designed a certain way to have a certain type of food, but that's also affected those people back then, and it killed them sooner.
It didn't. The things that killed them sooner was saber-toothed tigers and wars.
Right.
Warring tribesmen.
So it wasn't disease, you're telling me?
Trauma. It wasn't. And even if you even look at the people who are alive today that live in those type of climates, the Eskimos, for instance, they don't eat hardly any vegetables, and they have virtually no heart disease.
You telling me broccoli doesn't grow out of ice?
It doesn't.
Oh, wow.
They have to eat the foods that are available to them. So if they've been in that climate for so long, the people who have adapted to that climate, and when I say adapted, meaning if you weren't designed well to eat those foods, you're going to die, and you're not going to have children and you're not going to pass those particular genes on. Those genes are going to die out in those people, and the ones who have genes that allow them to survive eating polar bear blubber, for instance, and getting their vitamin C from things like that, those people are going to pass those same genes on to their ancestors, and they're going to be passed down, and they're going to be able to survive on those type of foods, whereas you, I'm assuming your ancestry might be from southern Italy, you need the food that was available in those climates.
So I have a baby today. The baby gets adopted by an Eskimo family, and they're living in Alaska.
Right.
Okay.
That's a problem.
The baby is now living on their diet, knows nothing else. The genes know something else.
True.
But the baby mentally, physically doesn't know anything else. What happens to the baby?
The baby doesn't perform well. The baby may get obesity. The baby may get vitamin deficiencies, because the baby...
Well, you're saying may now, suggestively. Will that baby or not? If the genetics, if the genes are reading as one, like my test, we know are supposed to be a low-fat type of eating plan, and you're put out there with the Eskimos, and you have the same genes, being my baby, of course, and you're on that high-fat diet, there is no may, as far as what we're talking about with testing, right? You
got a very high percentage chance that the baby would develop problems, because that baby wouldn't be getting the type of foods that it should have.
You're just covering your ass. You will develop problems if your genes are not. Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. If your genes don't read from what I've learned through all of this, if your genes don't read what you're supposed to be eating is good for you, for what your gene expression is, that's the word I was looking for, then it's going to resist. And that's what we're finding and why people should take this test. Because if you don't look the way you want to look, and it's not due to exercise, let's say, and let's say it's not due to your trying of how you eat.
It's not due to will. You're trying to do what you think is right.
Exactly what you think is right. Well, then it's something else. And your body is showing up in what I've said 1,000 times in symptoms. Symptoms of being deficient in certain nutrients, even though you think you're eating well. Having a little extra fat that you shouldn't have or don't want to have, rather. Okay? Aging faster.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's certainly a factor. All right, so let's move forward. Let's not say how. Is there, and I know the answer, but is there one single diet that is best for a man and a woman? Let's say they have the same gene expression, or don't they?
Well, the best diet for any individual is the best diet for that individual. Period.
But are the genes going to be that different?
A man and a woman can have the exact same genes,
right?
If their ancestry was from the same location,
right?
So you might.
But then you also have a man and a woman,
right?
All right, we're talking about different hormones and all that other stuff. Would they still eat the same if they have the same gene expression?
In general, yes. That's when we get into some of this other personal, individual biochemical testing to see how the individual's chemistry is functioning at that time. We can make modifications based on that, but from the genes, George, you and your female counterpart from southern Italy, will say, basically need to be in the same realm of diet. You and another man from different parts of the world.
I don't like other men.
Need to be you and another man that may be at your same fitness level, your same age level, your same same health level.
Right.
May have to eat a completely different diet if your ancestry is from different parts of the world.
Let me go one step further. Twins. Same genes.
Yeah.
Female, male, twins. Okay, same genes.
Not exactly in female, male. Only in identical.
Well, in identical.
In
right?
identical, you have the same genes.
But my point is, in that respect, would they still need to eat because they're from the same area? They would.
Ideally, genetically identical twins need to have the same diet and the same exercise routine to optimize themselves.
However, what you're saying is you still have a way of delving into a more detailed biochemical way of testing them to find out what specifically the twin female would need, right?
Again,
versus the twin male?
Well, when you're talking about non-identical twins, they're no more genetically alike than
identical.
There's no such thing as male female.
But I'm sorry. You know what I mean? In looks. In looks only. So you're saying non-identical in okay. I get what you're saying.
They're no more genetically alike than a brother and a sister, which, by the way, can be very, very different at times.
Well, that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, when you look at the genes, every gene we basically have 2 parts from mom and 2 parts from dad. Mm-hmm. You could get the bad one. One brother could get both the bad ones from their mother and their father, and they ended up with bad.
Okay.
The other sibling could get both the good ones from mom and dad and end up good. Whereas the mom and dad were both bad, good, kind of average.
Okay.
One brother could end up with very good genes for that trait. The other could end up with very bad traits, and they're brother and sister, but they have completely opposite genetics.
So Danny DeVito, Arnold Schwarzenegger proved it.
That's an extreme example, but yeah, if every single gene happened to work out that way,
yeah,
it could end up that extreme.
Okay. So moving forward, exercise.
Right.
I know we're kind of still on the same plan here, or plane, if you will, but how is it that exercise would differ here?
Again, it kind of goes back to the same ideas of where you're from. If your ancestry is from a region where they had to travel a lot more, mm-hmm. and that was part of their lifestyle, maybe they had to adapt. The ones that lived were the ones that could travel long distances, mm-hmm. and maybe were better at endurance type training, and they could stay fit that way. If, on the other hand, you had to fight, the woolly mammoths?
Yeah.
Maybe you needed more strength.
Right.
And that would be more of a northern climate. So that can tell you a little bit about, where you're from. Can it also tell you what your ideal exercise program can be?
A great test to be developed would be one that could be detailed and specific about the foods that you eat, or even a type of cigarette. Now, and I mean develop this test because it's not available, but one that can tell you had ice cream that day or that week, and or how many cigarettes you had, or the type of cigarette. And the reason I'm saying that, when I say type of cigarette, I don't mean the name brand. I mean the strength, if you will. Cigar versus cigarette, or if there's other cigarettes that have higher nicotine in them. And the reason I mention that is because it'd be great to have this test to find out how that affected you from a standpoint of weight gain in the future because of the type of foods that it knew you ate, or arteriosclerosis, hardening of the arteries, right? So not as an overall, like, just genetic standpoint telling you of what you need to eat or stay away from, but what you ate. It'd be great to have a test. I don't know if that test could ever come in our lifetime, but how cool would that be to have a test that can tell you in a more detailed sense, we know this is what you ate this week. This is what this is doing to you right now.
The direct consequences of your actions.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be amazing?
It'd be great.
But we can measure those markers, and you can. I have people keep a diet and exercise log, so I know what they're doing, and then I test them and say, it's not looking so good. Look what you've been doing. And you can kind of relate the two. It's not quite as precise as what you're saying, but we can more or less get that information right now.
All right, so coming up next, do kids who resist their parents when they want them to eat vegetables now have an excuse? If your significant other has a sweet tooth and they keep getting fat and they say, I don't want to have this stuff, but they can't stop eating it, is it their fault? Do they have an excuse, and should you leave them alone? Or should they call Dr. Webster and get this test? I think you know the answer. We'll talk more about that coming up next. 726 Sports Radio 1310 The Ticket.
10 The Ticket.
735 Sports Radio 1310 The Ticket. George D. John Train Station Fitness Show. Find me on Facebook, George D. John, and you can see updates that I put up on there and promos for the show. Dr. Webster's in the studio. We're talking about genetic testing and why do you crave sweets? Why do you hate vegetables if you do? Have you conditioned yourself to hate vegetables because you're on a crappy diet, or have you never ever liked vegetables? And that's one of the things we're discussing today, as well as the recommendations don't always match the results of a test, of any test. I don't care if it's a cholesterol test. I don't want to say any test, but we can almost blanket it and say maybe 90% of the tests that are performed.
I would say when a lab provides not only the results, but also a recommendation based on that result, you want to be a little bit skeptical.
Yeah. So not necessarily the results. The science is there to prove that. But why do people hate vegetables? Some where they've not conditioned themselves. They just never like them. And then the other side of the coin being loving the sugars.
Yeah. Well, one factor I've found in my practice, an easy way, is to test their zinc levels, because that affects your taste buds. But I've also, now that I've gotten into this particular test, I've seen that there are genes that control the way you taste bitterness. So a lot of vegetables, like let's say like cabbage or Brussels sprouts or broccoli, they have a bitterness to them. Right. And if you have this gene where you're what we call a bitter taster, the bitter taste is more pronounced in that particular person. Mm-hmm. Now, I've seen some bitter tasters that say, yeah, it is really bitter, but I like it. Other people say, it's so bitter, I hate it. Right. So the gene doesn't necessarily mean you're going to like it or not, or dislike it. It's just going to mean that the bitterness is more pronounced. And I guess whether they like it or not is kind of more of an individual factor. It's, your genetics is individual too, but we can't even predict whether you're going to like it more or less, just that it's more of a pronounced bitter taste to some people.
So that didn't tell me a whole hell of a lot then.
It really doesn't, other than the gene says the bitterness is going to be more pronounced. That's all it says.
So then what about sugar cravings?
Sugar craving, we can test to see if you tend to have more of a sweet tooth, whether you crave those type of foods. Now that one actually is cravings. So we can test the genes for that. And also there's a gene that specifically tests how you taste sweetness, whether you taste it normal or whether you don't taste it much at all. And the people who don't taste sweet very pronounced, those people tend to like to add extra sugar to their stuff because they can't taste sweetness. They want more and more sugar.
And affecting their zinc levels and everything else.
More and more sugar. I mean, we know a million things that affects.
Right.
And it's not
so I'm sure people are asking right now, and I know we have to move on, the question is, okay, Dr. Webster and George, what do I do if I have a sweet tooth? How, okay, my genes say that I'll be predisposed to wanting this stuff, craving this stuff as a kid and as I'm an adult.
Have xylitol on hand. Get the sugar out. Use xylitol because xylitol has the sweet taste. It'll satisfy that sweet taste
I do it.
that you're craving.
I do it almost every day.
Or even stevia. If you like the flavor of stevia, sometimes for people with bitter taster, they won't like stevia as much because it has more of a bitter taste.
Yeah.
But other people think stevia is just fine. So there's things we can do to fix some of these problems. You can't change your genes, but you can do things to get around your weaknesses.
All right, so let's get into my test. You pulled my test up, and you also pulled up a female who's completely different than mine. What were the results of the test, my genetic test that you got back?
Well, starting with the diet, you in fact need to be on a Paleolithic low-fat type of diet.
Right.
So your diet needs to. You could probably get away with things like eating a reasonable amount of fruit. But probably not a lot of boar. Probably not a lot of excess coconut oil or butter or things like that.
You know what's odd though, and I have to interrupt you here because the majority of my adult life, the more I learned about the benefits of fat, and not knowing what my genes suggested I needed to have or not have, I've had a lot of fat.
Yeah.
A lot of fat on purpose. Almonds, walnuts, they're not the same fats. Almonds, walnuts, and eggs, virgin coconut oil, olive oil, tons of olive oil. Yet I look at my body and I'm happy with my body.
Yeah, you are fit.
And I believe now if I'm going to say okay, if my gene expression says I have to have low fat, and I look at my body, I say, hold on, I could either say the genetic test is off, which it's not, or I could say it's because I compensated for it by exercising so much.
I think that's probably what happened.
Yeah.
Your exercise was so consistent, so disciplined, that you were able to overcome the fact that you weren't eating perfect for your genetic type, but you were still eating a good Paleolithic diet.
Right.
So you were within the general realm of where you needed to be. All this says for you, George, is that you need to tweak it a little bit.
Right. And I did.
Yeah, and you're going to notice some positive changes. And we've talked about some of your positive changes lately. I noticed it even when I looked at you in the face. I just thought, I didn't even mention it to you until you said something.
Right.
And you were talking about some other things that you've been doing. But I did notice a difference in something in your face just says you look a little bit younger or something's right.
Right.
So there's no doubt that it's been a positive change for you.
Another one that I know where I can say, okay, this genetic testing is right on. Let's talk about the exercise, and we want to make sure that people understand what you're about to tell me that I need for exercise per this genetic test I took.
Okay, on your particular test, it says you have enhanced benefit from endurance type training.
Wait a minute, hold on. I'm supposed to start running marathons?
No, not at all.
Exactly.
Not at all.
Say that a little louder for the people.
Yeah. No marathon training. No marathon training.
What's endurance training then, Dr. Webster?
Endurance training, in my mind, and what I've looked at the studies, is things like interval training. There's hardcore burst training where maybe you're going to complete failure within 25 to 45 seconds, and then there's interval training where you're sprinting, but maybe not to complete failure. Sprinting to 75% failure, and then jogging for a few minutes to kind of catch your breath, and then sprinting again. Back and forth between 80% intensity and a 20% intensity.
But then there's
would
a
be
rest.
Interval training. There's not rest on interval training. You're going,
no, I understand
but you're going between 80% intensity and 20% intensity.
Right. When I say the rest, and you went with the running, I went with the weight. My mind went with weights. If you pick 5 exercises and you went from one exercise to another, all 5, and then rested, and you picked them all over again. But how do you
consider
know?
that more like burst training, and I recommend burst training, and even this lab.
Well, that would be more than burst
training
because that would be about 3 minutes of exercise if you did all 5 exercises.
If you're not stopping, yeah, I can give you that.
You know what I
that
mean.
would be more endurance type.
You know what I'm getting at.
More endurance type weight training.
So that as a personal trainer, for a personal trainer today to say, okay, I look at you, I'm going to give you HIIT, which is high intensity interval training.
Yeah.
And another person may need more strength training, more heavy weight training. You're giving them the wrong type of training as a personal trainer, but you don't know that unless they have the test.
Right, and the crazy thing, I've looked at the studies that back these up, and the people who have certain genes, on the strength training one anyway, if those people do strength training, you're not going to believe this, George, but the studies show that the people who do heavy weightlifting and don't have the gene for it actually increase fat mass.
Well, no, I do believe it, and I'll tell you why. Because you see some people who do lift heavy all of the time, And you say, well, as a personal trainer, if you've got more muscle, you should be burning off more fat. And say, well, hold on, I don't know how the person's eating. But then you go out with that person, you see how they eat, but they're holding on to fat, even if they're eating healthy. So it does register or resonate with me, rather. And
something you've observed.
It's something I've observed. It does make sense. If I were to train today, I would say, holy crap, I don't know much about what the hell I'm talking about as far as the type of program to put somebody on, because I don't know what their genes suggest that they need, which goes for any personal trainer today. So what are we really doing? What we're doing, if you're a personal trainer today and someone doesn't take this test specifically for the type of training they need, is you're putting them on a program to show them how to move properly, proper biomechanics. That's what you're doing. You're making them healthy in that respect. But are you making them healthy from a standpoint of fat loss, overall health?
Right. And all we can do, really, if you don't have this genetic test, is just go by the numbers.
Right.
The number says burst training is number one percentage-wise. But you, as an individual, can get better results doing a combination of burst training and interval training versus somebody else can get better results with burst training and heavy strength training.
We have to make all of this super fast. We're going to be late here soon. We have this and then the last segment. I want you to comment right now on the recommendations that were made from me specifically as far as food, and how that's not true, if you could do it. If you can't, we'll cut it off and do the rest later.
The recommendations by the lab, when it said you were a low-fat diet, that equates to a higher percentage of carbohydrates. You have to get your energy from somewhere.
Give me pasta, give me all these bad wheats and breads and stuff, right?
And that's really the problem.
Right.
The genetic test, analyzing your genes is extremely accurate. This lab is certified to be able to do that. And the studies behind it, they've got hundreds, if not thousands. I've looked at a lot of them. The science is solid. The problem is when a lab hires a nutritionist to then make a recommendation, and the nutritionist maybe isn't well versed in the whole reasoning behind genetic testing.
Right.
They recommended foods, get this, George, they recommended foods for you that did not exist when your genes were around on Earth.
And those foods are, like what I just mentioned.
Pasta and bread.
Pasta and bread.
Whole grains. And
They
those
were not,
foods, they didn't even exist.
But we have to
It's so
say that
absurd.
again. Yeah, they didn't exist those thousands of years ago. They were not around. So for you to suggest that, number one, is not correct.
Right.
Number two, I'm proof positive of that, because had I been introducing those things on a daily basis as it suggests, I would not look the way I look. I'm not going to look perfect, but you understand my point.
Yeah, and the tests don't say that either. When they do a low fat, that's all they're doing. They've got some test where the certain populations are eating lower fat.
Right.
That's all they're getting. They're not testing, well, what if this person eats a lot of pasta and bread? There's no test like that's backing up this particular genetic test. It's not that at all. So the recommendations were purely based on a standard nutritional dietitian model, and I don't buy it at all.
So coming up next, I actually want to expand on that, because maybe they didn't hire a nutritionist. Maybe they hired a registered dietitian.
Possibly so. I don't know who they hire.
Okay, but you understand.
But
that there's like two schools of thought here.
I make individual results based on the results, so my patients get the right recommendations based on their results.
If you want to go back to this show and hear it again in case you missed something, I'll have it loaded sometime this weekend on YouTube. Go to YouTube, enter 21-Day Body Makeover. Coming up next, we'll talk more about this test with Dr. Webster and how it can benefit you. 747 Sports Radio 1310, The Ticket. George DeJohn, Sports Radio 1310, The Ticket, 755 rather, with Dr. Jeremy Webster. If you want to get in touch with Dr. Webster to learn more about these tests, and you, Dr. Webster, have permission to share my information with other people that call you, if anybody asks, so they can, just to let you know that.
Thanks.
Call Dr. Webster, 972-735-0707. Talk briefly about, we'll finish up mine right now, about vitamin D. It's real important for people to know about me taking 10,000 milligrams.
10,000 IUs.
I use international units, rather, of vitamin D, is what I meant, every single day. And I go get this test, the genetic test, blanketing everything, but you saw something on there that didn't really make sense.
Well, it does make sense. It clarifies.
Well, it doesn't make sense to the person who takes any supplement and says, and then the test comes back and says, well, you don't have enough of it.
Right. On this particular test, there is a section that looks at nutritional needs for certain things, some really important nutrients, vitamins. Vitamin A, vitamin D, and vitamin E are your fat-soluble nutrients that it looks at, and it looks at some of the B vitamins. And you, in fact, which which by the way agrees with a previous genetic test that we did. It says that you have genetic additional needs, additional requirements for vitamin D because you have a vitamin D receptor abnormality. Then what we looked at your blood results and actually measured the vitamin D in your blood. And even though you're taking 25 times the RDA recommendation for vitamin D, which is usually enough, that's what I give people who have low vitamin D levels, and it usually gets their level up real quick. We've got you on that, and your vitamin D level is actually still low. Lower than I am.
And one of the recommendations you made for me a while ago is to take the 10,000 IUs of that once a week. Then it went to every day. We've not tested me now since I've been taking it every day.
Right.
And that was my mistake. I said that at the beginning. I've been taking it every day, and it showed it wasn't enough. That's not true. Now I'm taking it every day. In about 4 or 5 months, I'll do another test, and we'll find out where I am. Talk real fast about the female who's completely different.
Completely different. She's a fit female. She's I can't remember exact age, about in her 40s.
Yeah.
Reasonably fit. Her husband thinks she's beautiful. She thinks she needs to lose weight, so she's one of those. She's
Right.
in pretty good shape. But her results are completely different than yours, George. She is the low-carb Paleolithic diet, so she needs to not eat a bunch of fruit. She needs to watch fruit. She needs to watch her roots like carrots and sweet potatoes. Not go there. Not go to the brown rice or the quinoa or those healthy, somewhat starchy foods at all. Not even some of the winter squash like the acorn.
Well, she needs more fat, though, right?
She needs more fat. She could do well eating beef and eating a lot of coconut oil, even supplementing with coconut oil.
It's virgin coconut oil for the people listening.
Yeah, lots of olive oil, lots of nuts. By the way, this breaks out your monounsaturated and your polyunsaturated fat too.
What is that?
It tells you whether avocados and olive oil might be a good type of fat for you, or
Right.
nuts, or whether seeds and fish oil and flax oil, like your omega-3s and your omega-6s, might be beneficial fats for you. So it breaks it out.
Well, also walnuts, too.
Walnuts are within the omega-3 family, absolutely.
Right. Well, people need to know that walnuts and almonds are not necessarily the same fat.
Not
Because of the
necessarily
vitamin E and omega-9 from the almond.
Right. Which can be more of a neutral fat, more of a monounsaturated
Right.
fat. They all have omega-3s and omega-6s and omega-9s in them, but the ratios are different depending on
Right.
what
The
nut.
walnut would be best for me.
Which nut? Yeah. Well, for you, yeah, actually, George, you have more benefit from monounsaturated fats. So your olive oil and avocados are going to be better for you in particular. Those are going to be your preferred type of fats if you're eating some fats.
Okay.
You have just got a neutral as far as the omega-3s and the omega-6s. So take a reasonable blended
Well,
supplement.
on the
and that's
email
it.
you sent me, you told me to stay away from, and I was going on your recommendations because I didn't want to go by the test recommendations.
Right.
You told me to stay away from avocado, olive oil, and coconut oil.
Coconut oil is a saturated fat. In general, you want to keep all of your fats low, but the one particular type that you need to increase based on your breakdown
Right.
is the stuff that's in avocado and olive oil. You
Okay.
still don't want to eat a lot of it,
Right.
maybe less total than you were, but that's the one that you might want to consume if you're going out of your way to consume a fat.
Okay, but I'm still cooking with coconut oil, though, when I cook.
Absolutely. If you cook, those are still the healthiest oils.
Right.
But you want to not put a bunch of it in there and maybe just use enough to grease the pan
Right.
versus somebody who needs a high-fat diet, low-carbohydrate,
Okay.
might put a lot of extra in to add that
All
specific
right,
fat.
I didn't realize what time it was. Darn it, we got to go. I
All
wanted
right.
to talk more about this lady. Anyway, all right, more about genetic testing. If you want to learn more about it, call Dr. Webster, 972-735-0707.